Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good morning for some of you in other parts of the country. I'm Celeste Carmichael, Program Development Specialist at Cornell University and a co-chair of the National Association of Extension Program and Staff Development Professionals Programs Committee. I want to welcome you to the October version of our NEPSDP 2019 webinar series. And today's topic is Who Me, an Author, Tips for Publishing Your Extension Work. We can tell that this was a popular topic because we had quite a few people that registered right away. I think 119 was our last count. So very excited to have Dr. Theresa Ferrari from Ohio State University joining us today and helping us learn more about how to publish our extension work. And when we get started, Theresa, I'm going to ask you to do a little bit more of an introduction. But before we get started, just a couple of notes. Thank you so much for taking a moment to introduce yourselves. I think all of you know that this work is really only made much more interesting by knowing who our colleagues are and interacting with our colleagues. And sometimes we lose a little bit of that on webinars, so I always like to ask folks to introduce themselves and make sure that you're chatting to all panelists and attendees so you can see each other in the chat. We are going to be using the chat today for some engagement and interaction, so kind of keep that open on the side panel, and Teresa's going to have some questions and answers for us, and utilizing the chat to engage with all of you as well. So I think that's all from me. We're going to go ahead and get started. As you have questions, please put them in the chat. Even if you have some suggestions that may not get responded to right away, I'm going to be tracking those, and at the end we'll have some time for some questions. Sound good? Theresa, y'all ready?
I'm ready.
All right, fantastic.
Okay, well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here to share some time with you to talk about publishing our extension work. My background in extension, I can't believe, actually extends back 39 years when I started at the University of Maine in a county position. And so shout out to the people from Maine that are on, and Michigan State, University of Florida, and now at Ohio State. And I even did a stint for a year at 4-H headquarters. So I bring that varied experience today. And also in terms of writing, I'm a reader first, but an author, a reviewer, and an editor. So I've kind of combined all of that experience into what we're going to talk about today. I have two official roles that I have here. Let me advance the slides because I'll get talking and I will forget to do that. Hang on just a second. Hold on. I know how to do this. There we go. So I have two official roles. I currently serve as the chair of the editorial committee for the Journal of Extension, and I'm also a editor for the resource review section for the Journal of Youth Development. And I have been a section or a co-editor for a special issue of the Journal of Youth Development last year. So that gave me some hands-on experience with the editing process. I'm going to talk mostly from the frame of reference of the Journal of Extension, because that's something that we all have in common. But the things that I will be sharing about that also would apply to other journals as well, except for the very specific things about the Journal of Extension that but other journals have similar types of categories and things of that nature. So we'll frame it with Journal of Extension and our common experience. So overview of what we'll cover today, a couple of objectives. We're going to review publication potential presented by extension work, discuss the writing process, and provide strategies for overcoming some common mistakes. What I will not cover is what happens once you submit a manuscript. Time-wise, I think we could do a whole separate webinar on that. But I will mention things about what reviewers are looking for, but the actual manuscript submission process is beyond the scope of what we can handle today. The goal is to get you writing a manuscript, and the rest comes after that. So starting out, we'll talk in this first section about benefits of and barriers to publication, and then discuss how to get started with turning your extension work into published work. So let's start with benefits. You can see a little cartoon here on the screen. I've tried to inject a little humor because I think sometimes the publishing process is a little bit scary or off-putting. So we'd all like to go to Paris, right? But what if your publishing could get you to Paris? Let's talk about some reasons why we as extension professionals published, or why we're told we should publish. So take a second or so to maybe put some thoughts in the chat box. What are some things that why you think we should be publishing, or why you've been told you should publish? Any thoughts on that? Okay, sharing ideas with colleagues, share our good work, share our knowledge. All right. Yep, all those things. Brand recognition, promotion packages, share what didn't work. That's a impact of your work promotion. Okay, absolutely. You've hit the nail on the head. I think some of the common reasons I know that I would come across is to share your work with others in a form that's readily retrievable. Things are not good to other people if they stay locked in our heads or just shared word of mouth with our colleagues. And in doing so, we're contributing to the body of knowledge and the scholarship in our field. And then at a very practical aspect is to meet requirements for annual reviews and for promotion and tenure decisions, you know, because someone said that was important. So you've hit the major areas. Well, now barriers. We're off to a good start with benefits, but what about barriers? If everything was all easy, we wouldn't be having this webinar, right? So think to yourself for a minute about how you would fill in the blanks on the question or the statement that's on the slide. I will write just as soon as something. Something happens here. We're going to do a quick poll to engage you a little bit, and the poll is now up on the screen. There are 4 common reasons why people maybe don't write or barriers to writing. They don't know what to write about, don't have time to write, don't know the format to use, and lack the confidence, and maybe some other things as well that we haven't captured with those big 4 there. See, the poll is inching up there. Don't have the time seems to be winning. Okay. Don't know what to write about. All right. Okay. So we're up, and you were selecting, choosing all that apply. So we've got more than, things will not add up to 100%, but it really looks like the not having time to write is the primary, with the others kind of even, and a few others. Okay, so we have a winner. 71% for don't have time to write. And then 27 for don't know what to write about, 20% lack confidence, and don't know the format to use is 16%. And we've got 16 other. So what are some of those other things? If you would write those in the chat box, that way we can capture those as we move on to talk about what to do about those barriers. Again, just a little humor while you're writing something there. Oops, I've got to close this out here. Okay. Yep, we did that. So I think I kind of figured out time might be the one that would catch everyone. So I'm completely caught up, said no academic ever. We don't ever seem to be caught up, do we? Or maybe it's that we don't prioritize the writing process because other things are crowding that out. And another one, we may have the best intentions, but just like New Year's resolutions, our writing resolutions may get pushed aside for other priorities. And this slide, it's driving me nuts because there's a few commas that are missing, but I put it in anyway. So my editing was going strong on the meme. So getting started, how do we get started? That's an important next section here. I'll address a few ideas that have worked for me, but they're things that have worked for others as well. And so I'm going to talk about 5 strategies here. Reuse, recycle, repurpose, enlist others, find a home, understand the article format and structure, and then make a plan. So we'll get started on that. The first one is reuse, recycle, and repurpose. We've done the things that are up here on the screen, conference presentations. You've probably written proposals for those, or poster sessions, grant applications, reports, program evaluations you've conducted, or some training or staff development. Can you think of things that you've done that fit in these categories that might be a candidate for reusing, recycling, or repurposing for some publication? So kind of hold that thought and keep that in mind as we go along. So I'll interject here about article categories because in using the Journal of Extension, this applies to other journals as well. So there's peer-reviewed and editor-reviewed. Peer-reviewed is going to go out to generally 3 peer reviewers to examine your manuscript, and then the editor kind of puts that all together and gives you a judgment on that. The editor-reviewed stays just with the editor. In the Journal of Extension, there's 3 things that fall under peer-reviewed. That's feature, research and brief, and ideas at work. The ideas at work has just 1 peer reviewer. The others have 3. And then editor-reviewed, tools of the trade, and a commentary. So these have different word limits that are involved in addition to who reviews it. A lot of times I recommend to folks who are just starting out to go for the ideas at work. It's 1,000 words, and lots of things that you're doing can be repurposed into an ideas at work. I've written things in all 5 of these categories, and I've used this strategy a lot. So I might start out with a presentation, and then after I've given it, I think about it more and turn it into a publication. So on to choosing a topic. That was something that came up as one of the barriers, not knowing what to write about. So I've condensed this into the 3 F's: familiarity, focus, and fit. So with familiarity, we're talking about to write what you know. It's what you do every day in your extension work. Other extension people want to know about that, or at least we'll assume that they do. And that kind of goes back to the 3 R's. You've already done it, so think about how you're familiar with it, you can repurpose it. Focus is important because with the word limits on articles, you can't kind of go off in a bunch of tangents. You'll get sidetracked, and it will not be a focused article, and that will come back to you from the reviewers and from the editor to make those changes. So I find this specifically happens a lot with people who are trying to take a thesis or a dissertation down to an article, and you've got to repurpose that. 100 pages don't condense well into 2,000 or 3,000 words as is. You need to make some decisions about how to focus that. And then the fit is considering the audience. In the case of the Journal of Extension, it's other extension professionals, but it may not just be in your program area. So you have to consider how you can package what you have to fit for the broadest appeal. Therefore, it shouldn't be too technical. If you've got technical things to share, another journal would be a more appropriate outlet for that. So everything would need to be put into an extension context. But even things in your own program area can be useful to others, as we'll see here. So another way to think about choosing a topic is to look at program implementation. So what program have you done? Do you have a process, a product, a technique, or tool that could be shared? Could you frame what you have from the aspect of benefits or opportunities and the challenges, kind of a pros and cons approach, or lessons learned? Maybe you've done something for the past 5 years or 6 years or so, and you've learned a lot along the way, and you want to communicate that to others. You can frame that as lessons learned. Sometimes folks think, well, it's going to take me too long to publish because I don't have any data. Well, maybe you have some that you're sitting on. You might have existing data that you don't need to collect new data. I'm thinking of enrollments in the 4-H world, things of that nature. And literature review, what is known about a topic. that's something that doesn't require data. It requires, but it does require writing. Here's a few examples I pulled from ripped from the headlines or ripped from the Journal of Extension in recent issues to showcase these three different examples. So program implementation, you could look at how to use crowdfunding in Extension. That has appeal across. That's not program specific. Awards of excellence, engaging college students, 10 tools for creating social media messages. Those are things that could have appeal across program areas. The data source here, in-depth look at 4-H enrollment and retention. And then including youth with disabilities in 4-H, a scoping literature review. They've told you what it is. They've told you that it's a literature review right there. So that is something that could help folks who are doing programs in this topic. So your ideas. Hopefully you've got a few ideas from that. Save those and squirrel them away for after the webinar. And as we're going to move, I spent a lot of time on that first strategy, but we'll talk now about another couple. All right, enlisting others. Another strategy is depends on your style, but you can do one or all of these things. So writing partners, a benefit of this strategy is that writing partners can keep you on track and share the writing load. This is when you actually are collaborating with others to write and your shared authorship. Reviewers refers to, I can't emphasize this strategy enough, do not submit your manuscript without having someone else review. People do it. We can tell. It's usually pretty clear to an editor or reviewer that you haven't done this. Speaking from experience, having someone not familiar with your topic can help you see the holes in your writing. A support group is a bit different than a writing partner. This could be a group who are writing, but they're not writing with you. They're writing their own work. This group members can keep each other on task and provide moral support. A mentor can be someone who has been a successful writer whom you can learn from and can offer suggestions to you. Another strategy is finding a home. We've kind of already done this in this webinar with sort of our home that we're exploring is the Journal of Extension, but there are others. And so if the Journal of Extension isn't where your work is aimed for your particular manuscript, you'll need to do that. So find the journal. Then you need to review the guidelines that will give you word limits that are specific to the journal and the different categories. Familiarize yourself with the style guidelines. In this case, the Journal of Extension, the American Psychological Association, or APA, is the style guideline used. Again, I can't stress this enough to find out what the journal wants, because a lot of times people look like they haven't read those guidelines in terms of what comes into the editor. So that's important. Many common mistakes come down to not following the guidelines. So if you can't follow them if you don't know what they are, so you need to find those out. And then reading past issues serves at least two purposes. You can find out what else has been written about your topic, which you're going to need to know when you start to write. And you're also reading for not just the content, but how the articles are in that journal, how they flow, what types of articles is the journal looking for, what's been published in the past. So finding a home and finding out more about that home is important. The article structure, we're going to, saying a standard article structure is, I'm actually going to kind of deviate from that. A lot of times the standard article structure that we are familiar with is one that's for research and presenting data. And we've just shared earlier that you might not be doing that. So I've adapted this typical article structure to a little bit to account for that. The other thing that I can share too is that in the APA guidelines, you will now encounter, if you get the new version of the book, what's called the Journal Article Reporting Standards, JARS, and they will give you some very detailed information about what to include in the different types of articles, whether it's qualitative, quantitative, or mixed methods. So that's something to make sure to take advantage of. So in the introduction or the literature review, you're going to be answering the why question. What did you study, explore, or create? Why was it important? Why is that an important question or topic? Or why was the tool or process useful? Or what did we know about it before? And how will addressing your topic advance knowledge or practice? So that's the first part of the bookend of an article. Two tools that are helpful here is Google Scholar, if you're not familiar with that. It's a great thing to be able to use that and specifically not bring up everything else in the Google world, but bring up scholarly works. And that is a really good resource. And then going through the journal archives and the search features that are part of journals that you can find what's been done before. Methods or description, if you're not doing a data-based article, it's the methods is the description of how you went about what you were doing. So how did you gather information, or what was your process for creating a program or resource? You want to, if it's a research article, you're going to talk about who participated. If otherwise, it might be your audience. Who was this designed for? How did you collect data? How did you go about your work? And what did you do with that? Not the actual results, but what did you plan to do with it? So this is leading up to your results, or what you found, or describe what happened when you did the program or when you used the tool. You don't interpret in this section. That comes next. And be sure to use tables and figures wisely. You don't want to overuse or underuse them. And that's kind of subjective, but they can be good tools to help you in presenting your information. And discussion is the so what, explaining the meaning or significance of your findings or the program. Linking back to the introduction, situate your results or work within the body of knowledge. So how are you the next thing in that long line of knowledge that's been generated? Identify the implications, but don't extend beyond your results. Acknowledge limitations, and then suggest future directions. So that is the bookends. And in the end, you're going and relating back to the beginning, so that you said what you were going to do, you did it, and then make sure that people understand how that fits. Other aspects of a manuscript that to not forget, the title. It seems like it's a small thing, and it is, but it's important to have the title reflect what the content is. Keywords, usually it's anywhere from 3 to 5. The abstract, the journal will tell you how large or small the abstract needs to be, and then the references that are at the end. There might also be an appendix or acknowledgments and a few other things that are at the end of the article. Finally, number 5 here is in terms of strategies to get started is to make a plan. There are actually books there's one that has a 12-week plan for writing your article. I have to admit I don't follow that, but it might help some people. But in terms of making a plan, here's 5 things to consider. Reading, maybe you need to schedule that time for reading. I know that I'm much more apt to do something that's an appointment on my calendar. Maybe I need to block out an hour to read. Writing, another R, if you forget the W at the beginning. Again, scheduling writing time. If time is a challenge for us, maybe we need to schedule it. Like I said, I know I'm much more apt to stick to something that I actually block out time for than hoping that I find time at the end of the week to do that. Reviewing, having someone else review, and building that in, figuring out who that might be, building that into your writing plan. I think sometimes we don't do this because it's a step people often skip. Maybe it's part of the time, like I'm rushing to get this in. I don't have time to have someone else review it. Maybe we don't want to impose on our coworkers, but you can return the favor someday. Skipping this step makes the reviewer's job more difficult, and it is likely to lengthen the review process for you and for the editor. So I definitely recommend building this into your plan. And then revise based on your own review of it, put it aside, come back to it, revise after a coworker looks at it, and just keep repeating that process till you get it to where it looks like it's ready to go. So those are five strategies to get started. Now we're going to get into the next section here on avoiding common mistakes. This section could probably be a much longer webinar in and of itself. So I have condensed that into something that I think will be useful. But first, let's talk a little bit. Let's get some audience engagement here. How is academic writing different from the other writing we do? Certainly it's different from texting. We don't use emojis and LOL and things like that, or at least we shouldn't in our academic writing. This might be one of the reasons why some of the mistakes get made is that attributed to the difference in academic writing and then our everyday writing. So what are some, maybe we've never been taught how to do it, but we're somehow expected to know it by osmosis. So if I ask you to identify some elements of academic writing, you could probably name some. So how is that different from other writing? Write a few things in, someone's already got it up there. Needing to cite sources, passive voice more accepted. We'll talk about that in a minute. More formal tone encouraged, absolutely, formal. Okay, have you guys looked at my slides? No first person. Okay, that depends on the journal. Fact-based, okay. So not just our opinion, but there's ways to get opinions in there too. Okay, any others? More jargon, yeah, far more predictable or formatted. Your readers expect certain things, incorporating data through tables, research-based, objectivity. Okay, some good responses there. Well, I thought of a few myself, and I think you've captured some of those. As soon as I can locate my cursor, we'll move to the next slide. Where did we go here? Sorry about that, guys. Gets lost in the, there we, come on, come back. Oh, there we go. Okay, academic writing. Citations, someone mentioned. It's more formal. It has a certain structure that people expect, and there's certain things about how we present the information, and then there is a review process. A lot of other things that we do doesn't have a review process. So I think that's, even though we won't spend time talking about that very much, that is a distinction of academic writing. So a lot of the common problems come down to these major areas. Problems with conciseness or coherence or clarity, saying what you mean in a way that others can understand it, that's logical and consistent. Precision and accuracy, which means exact, what you need and no more and no less. And then the grammar, that whole system of writing and the mechanics, the rules of written language and the style, which is the specific style, like in the case of APA, or even the journal may have certain conventions that they use that maybe violate the style, and that makes it confusing. So a lot of the problems come down to in these major categories. So because I couldn't, had to limit myself to, I came up with Theresa's top 10 in no particular order, and we'll address some of these things that kind of get people in trouble in their writing. So the first, oops, oh, sorry, back here, Oxford comma, the parallel construction, first person and active voice, citations and reference lists and missing parts, and punctuation, transitions and flow, anthropomorphism, terminology and use, and synthesis. So we'll go through those pretty in the next 10 or so minutes. All right, the Oxford or serial comma. You can find all kinds of memes on this on the internet. And I'm subscribed to the view on the right. We do use the Oxford comma or the serial comma, and it's used, and you can have my Oxford comma when you pry it from my cold, dead, and lifeless hands. I'm not giving it up. And in fact, APA style is to use it, so use it. Other styles, and journalistic style does not use it, so that can be confusing if you have to write in both forms. But you create some problems because in the case of the meme on the left, it appears that your parents might be Superman and Wonder Woman if you don't add that comma after Superman. Parallel construction. This one gets people. Parallel construction is basically that the elements in a series must be consistent. For example, if you're going to have that series that you are using the Oxford comma with, they all need to either begin with verbs or prepositions or words ending in ing. So, and this could also, isn't just for elements in a series, it's also if you're doing a bulleted list where everything begins with a verb, you're not changing that format, and something is, you're switching, using nouns or using, getting that confused. You need that consistency. So parallel construction is something that people trips them up sometimes. And some of the comments in the chat box related to first person and third person and active and passive voice. Depending on when and where you learned academic writing, you may have learned that it was third person and passive voice. However, in this day and age, and APA style, it is the opposite. It is first person and active voice. It is much more clear way of writing. Some journals still, I know I submitted something to a journal that said, we follow APA style, so I followed APA style, and they said, oh no, you can't do it this way. I'm like, okay, you didn't say that, but that's all right, we'll switch it back. When you, in terms of the first person versus third person, a lot of times people also, it's not clear who did it. The researcher did this. What researcher? Was it you or was it someone else? Especially when you're a sole author and you have to write I, it just doesn't seem right. It's easier to write we, but if you're the only author, you better claim it as what you did. If it's someone else that did it, a team, then say the team, not the researchers. It makes it seem like it's someone who isn't part of what the action that's being communicated in the article. Active voice versus passive voice. Then that was done by whom is the question that a reader will have. So here's a couple fun examples here. Active voice is, I love your blog. Passive voice is, your blog is loved. And the passive aggressive voice, I love how you have time to write a blog. Time always finds its way in there. So now a more serious example, and this comes from an actual article that I reviewed. A comprehensive list for inclusion was finalized. That leaves me asking questions. Who did it? And was finalized for what? So the team finalized a comprehensive list of topics to include in the curriculum. Much more descriptive by using the active voice. In this case, it was a team. This was a sole author who was writing, but she was writing about something that she was involved with with a team. So in this case, it was a team that did this. So that's much more clear in using active voice. Citations and reference lists. Citing your sources. That seems really simple sometimes to say, but a lot of times we come up with some issues with that. Ensuring that there's agreement between the text and what you've written in the body of the article and the reference list. Things in the text are in the reference list, things in the reference list have to be in the text. Oftentimes this is just that maybe you wrote something and it changed and you forgot to take something out or put something in. That's where someone else who's reading it can pick that up much more easily than you can. Your eyes gloss over that, you don't see it. Or you run out of time, but take the time to do that. And using the correct format is also important in citing your sources. So if you liked it, you should have put a citation on it. Citations, again, is that one of those big differences in this style of writing. So when to use a citation? If it's your own work and your own thinking, you don't need a citation. But if it was based on, taken from, or influenced by someone else's work, then you would need to provide an in-text citation. If you're quoting directly, then that's something where you would use quotation marks and using a page number. Remembering that the purpose of citations is to direct people to the source. And if something is specific, like a quote, you want to be able to direct them to it. We try to minimize the use of quotes because you don't want a manuscript that's full of quotes, but if it's something that the author's language is unique or specific, that it would lose the meaning if you paraphrase it, then you want to use a quote. But oftentimes we want to go more towards paraphrasing and synthesizing the work. A couple of quick citations here. I'm going to get in trouble on this because there's some variations from the 6th edition to the new 7th edition. But if you look at the basic format, that has not changed. The first place is held by the author. The second place is the date or the year of publication. The third place is the title, and that could be the title of an article, a book, whatever. And then you have to tell the publication information. In the case of a journal site article, the site publication information is the name of the journal, the volume, the issue, and the pages. And now we use what's called the DOI, or the Digital Object Identifier. And there's a format that I had to insert there that's being used. All of those, it's like a little train there at the bottom of the slide. Every part of that part ends in a period, with the possible exception at the end. If you notice, I'll use my cursor here, there's not a period at the end of the DOI. You would not put a period because the DOI does not include the period. So thing up above, if it ends right there after the page number, then that's where you would have a period, but not after the DOI. So I'm getting a little bit too much in the weeds on that, but I did want to show an example of a citation, and I liked this because it was color-coded. Book is really similar. There's a change from the 6th edition in the publication information, is that the city of publication is no longer going to be needed. If you're right, you'll see it because it's 6th edition for APA, but that again gets a little bit into the weeds. This is to show that we should be going back to those style guidelines and studying up on them. And I will get to APA again at the end. Another thing that happens that gets people in trouble is missing parts. This is primarily what I went ahead too quickly. Missing parts is, I'm thinking primarily in the methods section. When people are writing about what they did, they've left out parts of the procedure, or they perhaps are not in a logical order of how it happened. And that ends up leaving holes, and it's not clear. It gets at that, both the clarity and the precision aspect of it. So tables are another area where they're sometimes missing parts, or they're not put into the format that is required by the style guidelines. The method section is also a area where there can be some flow issues, that it's not necessarily in a logical order. So checking for missing parts is important. All right, well, that's our first 5. Now we've got 5 more to go. And we're transitions and flow. If you look at the picture, there is a roundabout. Roundabouts are supposed to help with transitions and flow. I'm not sure that they do. I think they might create more problems. But in an article, you want to look at having things like set headings and subheadings. If you think of it like traffic, you're trying to navigate through an article. And headings and subheadings help you do that. You want to have good flow between paragraphs and also within paragraphs, and using transition words like however, therefore, although, despite, furthermore, things that signal to the reader that something is being compared or something is important or changing in direction. Other things that impede the flow are things like too many prepositional phrases, sentences that are all the same length, it makes it choppy, or sentences that are too long. It's like, I've forgotten what you were saying at the beginning of the sentence by the time I get to the end of it. So maybe it needs to be broken into two. Punctuation, just another meme up here. Correct punctuation can be the difference in someone's life. There needs to be a comma in the sentence, let's eat grandpa, if you're directing grandpa to come and eat rather than having him be the main course. Commas, semicolons, colons, dashes, all these punctuation marks have the rules of grammar that we may not know, so we may not be following them. So APA style is, that's not APA style, it's just writing, but the APA manual does cover this in detail. Another word that is a big word, but means something relative to our writing is anthropomorphism. It's when writers attribute human actions to inanimate sources or to non-human animals. I've included the link specifically to that in the APA manual that describes it. There's an example there on the slide. The theory concludes. A theory can't conclude, people conclude. So the theory can address. It seems like that's splitting hairs, but that's anthropomorphism. The acceptable constructions that I have there on the slide are pulled right from the APA manual, and you can see that they're using first person or not if you want to vary that. In this section, I address, or this section addresses. The study found, the results suggest, or using the first person are acceptable constructions. If this is hard to remember, just go back to the acceptable constructions. That's not cheating. That's good, good writing. Then you learn to do it on your own eventually. Terminology and usage, this gets down into details. I'm not going to cover these specifically, but it's when to use and different words, and they mean something different, but we use them a lot of times interchangeably, like and such as, since and while, if and whether, that and which. There are misused a lot, and the terminology and usage is dealt with in the APA manual and tells. I also use Google a lot. I'll just put in since versus while, and it will remind me how those are used. Good Google searches will help you out. And then the terminology and usage also gets down to hyphenation, spelling, capitalization, all the rules for that, which I won't go into detail on, but there are sources to help you with that. But those are things that trip people up. Finally, number 10 here is, so I've just been talking about a lot of details, and synthesis is the exact opposite. It's big picture stuff. You need to synthesize in a literature review, especially in articles that have smaller word counts. You also need that in the discussion. You're looking for patterns, gaps, and your literature review shouldn't read like an annotated bibliography. Then this study found, then that study found, where every paragraph starts with a different study. You need to really boil that down. And I think that for that reason, the literature review and the discussion people find to be harder to write. You need to write them with this synthesis in mind. So that's our top 10, or my top 10 anyway. Now just a few things to wrap up here that are helpful in your writing. Consulting journal resources. The Journal of Extension in particular has a really good author page. The URL is on the slide. It has the guidelines, guidance for avoiding common manuscript problems. I refer to this even when I'm not reviewing or writing for the Journal of Extension, because the items that are covered here are really helpful. And then it has the specific things that do relate to the journal. Not all journals are this specific, but this Journal of Extension is really helpful for that. Another thing to do, and I think I've mentioned this a few times already, is to learn and follow APA style. That is the new publication manual. that came out as of October 1st. But the challenge for authors is that you don't know what you don't know. And so that's what leads to some of the mistakes. So it's important to take the time. Again, you're taking time. It seems like it's taking time away from your writing, but in the long run, it will improve your writing. It's an investment that you make because it's really an essential part. If you continue to make mistakes, you're going to continue to make them until you interrupt that process and learn the format to use. So the new edition has come out, like I said, just earlier this month, and they are accompanying it is the website. The website's also been redesigned. It's very helpful. I've already consulted it a couple of times. Now the challenge is going to be for people writing right now is that journals haven't switched over yet. In the case of the Journal of Extension, I'm not sure when that's going to happen, sometime next year, because all the author materials have to be updated to reflect any of the changes. The changes I've seen so far are not drastic, and they're not, I don't think they'll throw us off too much, but there are some, and I mentioned a couple just in terms of the reference citations. So I think that's one of the areas where we'll have to pay attention. But right now, you're still writing in sixth edition style, and unless a journal has switched to 7th. This is just a screenshot of the page. You can, any of the topics that we've covered and many more, you can find and click on their page and go to the section that addresses it. All the mechanics of style, the things like punctuation, spelling, capitalization that I mentioned. You can still get to the 6th edition. So when you are still needing to do that, you can do that. Another resource I find really helpful is Grammar Girl. She has quick and dirty tips. A lot of times her things come up in a Google search, and she is able to kind of boil things down in a way that's easy to understand. But make sure that she agrees with APA style. Usually she does, sometimes she doesn't. One final topic to discuss is ethics in publishing. And this relates to things like human subjects, authorship, and plagiarism. And I put 2 resources up on the screen on the slide that I came across that are helpful in thinking this through. Don't have time to really delve into it now. I will share just a brief story here because I think it's instructive. I served as a reviewer for a journal, and when it was a topic I was interested in, I'm like, oh, this is going to be great. Until I got to about the 2nd paragraph, and I'm reading it, and it sounded really familiar. It's because it was my words. About 300 of them altogether, in both the beginning and another, and 150 in the beginning, 150 in the end, and it was literally ripped from with a few minor changes in wording, even the references. And this would have been about a 10-year gap from when the original article to the one that I was reviewing had come out. So there was a couple other red flags. There really weren't many recent references, and I'm like, yeah, this is not, it was just the oddest feeling, and it was a coincidence that I was the one that reviewed it. But I did point it out to the editor, and I never saw it in publication. So it would have been far worse if it had been published, because it was a journal I read, and I would have found it then, and at least it got pulled before then. So I don't know what went on after that. I was a blind review, and but that was just a real interesting experience for me. I see we're getting close to our time, so I'll just finish with a couple more slides. Some humor here at the end. We've gotten you to the point where you've submitted your manuscript, and then the waiting begins. That is part of the process. So be prepared for that. And just, you may feel like this slide here, that writing really isn't just about writing. It's feeling like you should be writing and crying and then thinking about what you have to eat that will distract you from writing. But don't give up. Keep at it. And because it's almost Halloween, I had to throw this one in, the House of Grammar Horrors. And you know, there's lots of them out there, spelling and misuse of words and all sorts of things that grammar nerds that drive us crazy. And then a TV show idea called Dr. Whom, where an English scholar travels through time correcting people's grammar, like I did 3 times in the car on the way to work listening to the radio. Maybe this isn't you, but I hear it and I can't help myself. I yell back at the radio. So keep calm and write on. Just to review a little bit about what we've done today, we looked at the publication potential presented by our extension work. I discussed the writing process and some ways to approach that, and then provided some insight into common challenges and some strategies and resources for overcoming them. Really, there's 2 main things to do to get started: read and write. So I hope this has been informative and that the information shared will help you set you up for success as an author. That's me, my contact information, my name, email address. And if there's maybe some questions that can be in the chat box, if we have time to answer those, that would be great. Let's see what's next. Oh, okay, we'll go back. I also will just say one thing here while we're waiting for questions in the chat box. One of the things that I do or is to get feedback on my teaching, and it's hard to do that in the sense where it's not a face-to-face. I can't hand out a form. So one thing that you will receive, if you would be so kind as to give feedback to a Ohio State survey about effective teaching, and it's a very short, I think it's 9 questions and opportunity for comments. So I would appreciate when you receive that. It's not spam, it's something coming from Ohio State to evaluate my teaching in the workshop. So questions?
While we're waiting for questions to come in, Theresa, I just want to say thank you. This was awesome. It's a great reminder of the value and of making sure that you're grammatically correct. I really think that that's probably something that, I mean, it didn't really come up as we were talking about some of the challenges of writing or making time for writing, but in the getting it done, you know, in the process of getting it all done, that certainly does come up for everyone, right? In the review
Absolutely.
process. So, so that was wonderful. Thank you. For participants, you know, feel free to add some questions. Some of the questions that did come in were, is this being recorded? Will it be posted? Yes, of course. It will be.
Switch to that slide. So
thank you. Yep, it'll be on the napsdp.org website under webinars in the archive section, along with the slides, and you know, probably include a couple of resources as well. I did put the link for the Journal of Extension. If you're not a regular reader of Journal of Extension, I would definitely suggest that you do that, and I think you can log in so that they come to you directly. For our New York State colleagues and probably a lot of other folks that are you know, in similar positions across the country, you know, we forward on those links when new information comes out. Journal of Extension is kind of our journal, so that you can see how extension gets done. So. All right, let me see what's coming in here.
There's a question about suggestions for integrating work into technical journals that are focused on the science, such as the example is working on climate change, but having a hard time getting that integrated into climate change journals. That's a good question. And I know that in my area, that is more, it's youth development, so that's the journals that I have been publishing in, although I have also published in other journals that are somewhat more technical. Journal of Youth Development is practitioner based, and I think that is also the case with the Journal of Extension. So I think those are certainly the challenge that's presented by those journals is that they may have more rigorous standards. I would suggest, and I can't speak from memory on the journal article reporting standards, the JARS, but that is really helpful because it looks at it helps to look at what is expected in terms of the quality and the rigor of those kinds of articles. And now that's coming from more psychology, but strict psychology is much more rigorous than more practice-based, where they're doing experimental work and things of that nature. And maybe some of the hard sciences have similar resources as well that you could check out. I don't know as much about that specifically. And if there's a journal that you're particularly interested in, I'd suggest looking through that journal to see the types of articles that are there. And if something that you're writing about would maybe fill a gap in something that isn't there, but just to get an idea of the types of work that is being published and if you're doing the things that would address that. One thing I didn't address is that this is sort of more like after the fact that I was framing my remarks, like think about what you've done that you could write about. The other part is to think about going forward. So what is it that I need to do to set up what I'm doing from the beginning to meet the requirements that a particular journal would have? So those would be my suggestions on that. I hope that helps.
Thank you. I'm just going to make a quick announcement here. Notice here that there is a conference, an annual conference for national for NAAP-SDP, and I have the dates wrong on there. It's December 3rd through the 5th of 2019. I was looking at my calendar and must have been thinking about when I was traveling, so apologies for that. If you haven't looked at joining us for that, the registration is open until November 18th, and it's a fantastic conference. So apologies for putting the wrong dates on there.
I see a question from Nancy about working on revisions for an article that is in the Journal of Youth Development, and the reviewer is suggesting to make it more engaging. Any suggestions or examples on how to do that? I'm not sure off the top of my head that I can come up with something, but if you are part of or a 4-H professional, if I'm not mistaken, Nancy, and if you're going to be in West Virginia, bring your article along. I'll take a look at it. Be glad to do that. It's hard in the abstract to think about that. I think, yeah, I'm not coming up with anything off the top of my head, but I think that particularly in a practice-based journal, that's something that reviewers or editors are looking for. And maybe it's going back and thinking, why would someone want to know this? What's the appeal? How can I make that more evident, maybe to the readers? And maybe it's just in the introduction that needs to come out, maybe a little bit more strong. But I'd be glad to give you some feedback on that if you're going to be there, or otherwise you can email me. Another question here: if you're writing as a group effort, do you have suggestions for best tools that you think work effectively? Okay. I'm not sure. I think I've done it the old-fashioned way. I
can respond to that a little bit.
Someone else may have some feedback. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of collaborative work styles, it really depends on who you're working with. So if you're working with somebody that prefers to go back and forth by email, that might not be your style. But, I would just always suggest making sure you check in with whoever you're collaborating with, because some folks really like Google Docs. There's a number of folks that like Box. It really depends on who you're working with and what they're open to doing. We sometimes try to drive people to work in tools that that they just prefer not to work in, and that doesn't work either. So, but track changes is always helpful.
Yes. Sometimes when I'm working in track changes, I hide all the changes and then I read it without that, because sometimes there's so many markups that I can't see little holes there, and so I often will start not remove them, but just hide them and go in that way. I also still do face-to-face in discussing with people. I find it hard to write at the same time that people are writing, so it's more asynchronous, just because I have to be like in my own space, in my own head when I write. I'm also not the type that writes to start with an outline, and some people are very much more organized than that. I'm a little bit more, I eventually get organized, but I just have to kind of throw it all on paper first. Well, not, type it out and then go from there. But everyone has their own style.
Well, very good. Thank you so much, Theresa, for your time, and thanks to everybody in the audience for joining us today. We do have another webinar planned for our NAPSDP 2019 webinar series in November. Still trying to pin down a date, so we'll keep folks posted. Do check out the napsdp.org website for a video archive of this webinar, as well as information about our December conference in Savannah, Georgia. Appreciate everybody being on, and once again, thank you so much, Theresa, for your help, and special thanks to Michigan State for hosting our webinar series. Thanks so very much.
Yes, thanks. It was fun.